Change was in the air, both for race, gender, and socioeconomic status. And so these murder ballads were being written in response to all those changes. Basically like, oh, don't break the rules of society, don't sway out of the social norms that we're used to, because if you do, bad things will happen to you. Greetings, fellow music lovers, and welcome to today's episode of Folk Music History. Today we're going to be talking about Appalachian Murder Ballads. Just a quick disclaimer, there will be discussion of violence and murder. We're not going to get too graphic. We're not going to get graphic at all visually. There will be some discussion on the specific murders that the murder ballads were based off of. Also, if you didn't watch my previous video on women's warning songs, you might want to pause this video and watch that one really quick, because there is a bit of an overlap and it might just be helpful to know about women warning songs before watching the murder ballad video. Okay, so here we go.
I will be using terms women and female and she, her defined as people assigned female at birth, which includes trans/non-binary individuals of the past. The same is true for when I use terms such as men and male and he, him, which then include people assigned male at birth. But for the sake of simplicity and the fact that we are referring to events that happened in the distant past and non-binary trans terminology was not used in the research I found, I will be using gender-specific terms such as women, men, she, her, he, him, etc.
The when and where. The when, we're talking about early 19th century to early 20th century. Where? We're talking about the Appalachian Mountain region, southeastern US, generally. The specific states these songs were popular in: Kentucky, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Georgia, but also outside of the Appalachian region, including Mississippi and Indiana. But the locations for the real-life murders that these ballads were based off of happened mainly in North Carolina and Kentucky. The earliest ballad I have record of that I'm going to talk about today is the murder of Naomi Wise that happened in 1908, and the latest murder, Lula Byers, in 1917. We have the when and where, so what about the who? The people living in the Appalachian Mountain region at this time were the early settlers from Europe. 90% of those settlers were from the Scottish-English border, which was the main community that we have been able to trace these murder ballads from. But we also have immigrants from England, Scotland, Ireland, Germany, but also from Sweden and Finland.
AKA white people forcing people captive and trading them as goods on the slave market. This involved the enslavement of indigenous peoples being shipped to other countries from the US as exported goods versus the enslavement of black people being shipped into the US from Africa, the West Indies, etc. as imported goods. Keeping this in mind, as early as the 17th century, perhaps even earlier, the demographic of the Appalachian Mountain region includes indigenous communities, particularly Cherokee, and also African Americans, roughly 10%. The present-day demographic of this region continues these past trends, consisting of roughly 11.5% non-white. I'm telling y'all this because I want y'all as the audience to recognize that the sexist terrorism and femicide happening in relation to these murder ballads affect everyone whom are exposed to them, not just white people. White feminism is not the default for this or any of my videos.
So what is a murder ballad? Well, it's a subgenre of a traditional folk ballad. So the basic formula is that it's a narrative story of a woman being murdered by her male lover, with the motive being that she becomes pregnant out of wedlock or to be punished for her sexual freedoms. She's being punished for being sexual. Often the murderer is either caught and imprisoned and or executed, or he is able to escape punishment entirely due to his masculine resourcefulness. So that's what a murder ballad is. But why did they come about? Why do they exist? Well, there's a research paper that I discovered that I got a lot of my information from. I will link below quotes that the reason for these murder ballads was a response to an increasingly modernized American society, both socially and technologically. So there was just a lot of change going on. Beginning in the later 18th century, industry was slowly moving into more rural areas, and by the 1830s, the Industrial Revolution had begun. So all these were really big changes that people writing folk songs wanted to respond to. So those are the technological advances that were happening. There was lots of big social changes happening as well. Slavery ended in 1865. People were fighting for more rights. People were fighting for the right to vote for both gender and race, and to have more civil freedoms. The first birth control clinic opened in 1917. Those all happened around the same time that these Appalachian murder ballads were being written and shared to the world. This was basically the response against them. The people who didn't want change, the people who liked things just the way they were, the people that didn't want people of color and women to have the right to vote, the people that didn't like that slavery ended, the people that certainly, and especially the people that certainly did not like women to have more sexual freedoms, because this is what these murder ballads were all about. So change was in the air, both for race, gender, and socioeconomic status. And so these murder ballads were being written in response to all those changes. Basically, songwriters would go to execution, where the person being executed murdered his wife, murdered his lover, and whatnot, romanticized that story and puts it in a song, almost like an early version of reporting, but it's a song, and then shares it, saying, basically, I don't want to say warning women, because warning songs we talked about last week, it's not the same. They are related. We'll talk about it later. But it basically like, oh, don't be like Betty. Don't go run off and, express your sexuality as a married or single woman. Either way, don't break the rules of society. Don't sway out of the social norms that we're used to. Because if you do, bad things will happen to you. Because it was never about the murderer being punished. It was never about that. It was a lot of it. The original murder ballads were really giving sympathy, really showing sympathy for the murderers, almost like they had to do it. It was part of their civil duty almost to punish the women for having sexual freedoms, to having more rights. And there was things that I found in my research that stated that these murder ballads were written and based more into speaking to white women. I'm not sure how you're supposed to tell someone's race from a song, unless it flat out says what race or ethnicity they are. But given that the population of Native Americans were definitely existent in this area, and given that in present day Native American women are the highest demographic to be raped or murdered, I highly doubt that the white women in this time were the only ones getting murdered. Yeah, maybe they were the only ones getting reported. Maybe they were the only ones getting written into folk songs, but I highly doubt white women were the only ones getting murdered for this kind of stuff. That's just one of my theories. These murder ballads were a reaction to more rights and freedoms to people of color, to women in general, and to expanding in social and economic status, because often the murderers were men of an upper class, and the women getting murdered were of a lower class and much younger. So there was reactions to that too, like stay in your lane. Basically, stay in your lane, stay at home, or else you'll be punished by the universe will punish you, even though it's the men that are punishing you. But the men aren't really seen to be, it's almost like the murderers were being seen as the victim in these songs instead of how they should be seeing them. But also there's a lot of symbolism in these songs. Often the murders are done near water, or the bodies are dumped into a river, or they are murdered by drowning. This has a lot of symbolism. It's here on purpose. It's to symbolize the woman being cleansed for what she's done wrong. And let me remind you, what she's done wrong is get pregnant out of wedlock, aka be seduced by the older gentleman. The gentleman who is probably of a higher class, is probably much older, or is probably older, maybe not much older, who decided to have his way with her. But the woman has to be murdered and is cleansed, needs to be cleansed and purified. Water being in the song is symbolizing that. And so I mentioned before, when songwriters would go to real life executions and base these songs off real life murders and real life events. And this was kind of like a form of spreading news, because oral tradition is still very significant for this area at this time. Illiteracy is still very much present. The community is getting a lot of their information from the songs that are being passed around, and I talked about this a little bit about how songs are collected and passed down by the women in the community in women's warning songs. I talked about that in that episode. Those rules still apply. Women are writing songs, still writing folk songs. I did say that in the other episode, but I'm not sure if these murder ballads, if this subgenre specifically is written by those same people, if that makes sense. It's almost like a response to the women's warning songs. That's just another one of my theories. I couldn't get a clear message on who exactly was writing these folk songs. We just know the time period and the origin of the style. And there is a book that I discovered that I will mention later on too, called Unprepared to Die, and I will find that and link it below. It's a book breaking down a murder ballad called The Knoxville Girl. That in that book he does go into how these songs are written based on real life murders. So that probably has more information, but to me, my theory is that, yeah, these murder ballads were more of a response to the women's warning songs, and they were written and passed by the men that didn't want the change they were seeing in the world to be in their area. So I guess it doesn't have to be just men writing these songs, but I can almost certainly say that they were all written and passed down by the people who didn't want change, whether they were male or female, the conservatives, if you will, in that area. All right, well, that's pretty much it for part 1. Stay tuned for part 2, where we will be getting more into comparing murder ballads with women's warning songs and more on why murder ballads are still relevant today, and more on the evolution of what murder ballads transitioned into from the past to the present.
So stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hate to be such a tease, but I had some issues and had to make it into 2 parts. But I will upload the second part as soon as it's finished instead of waiting for 2 weeks from now to post like I normally do on this Folk Music Friday schedule. But in the meantime, if you can't get enough of learning and listening about these murder ballads, check out my Spotify. Go to Spotify and search Crafty Gal Things. I have playlists that I've made in correlation with the episodes I've made so far on folk music history. There's a playlist about women's warning songs, as well as a playlist, you guessed it, for Appalachian Murder Ballads. So you can go on there and listen to that in the meantime while you wait for me to upload. Alright, thanks for watching. I'll see y'all later.
Get Cher's butt out of it on frame, because I need that. Either have her all the way in there or not at all. Might be what we do. Make it straight. Straight. Are you straight? Alright. Okay. What do I want to say? It's gonna be a long day. So, it's been a while. I'm just not in it today, guys. We're gonna keep going though. We have the early settle. The first birth control clinic. Can't think of what it is called. I don't know. I'll think of it later. It's called Unprepared. What is it called?